By 2015, the internet reached a new milestone. The average person was spending more than 5 hours a day online. Facebook was used by half of the world's online users, and Skype calls totaled over 2 billion minutes every single day. We were living inside screens, and we trusted those screens with our secrets. Big mistake.
You already know my name, and you can see that I'm ashamed.
I'm afraid. I'm afraid. Yes.
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast. I'm Anna Bogutskaya, your podcast host. I'm a film critic and author of Feeding the Monster, and in this series of the Final Girls podcast, I'm exploring the intersections of horror and technology, from the very first robots of silent cinema to the ghosts that are lurking behind our Zoom calls. On this season of the podcast, we're deep diving into machines. Every episode, I'm joined by a guest to discuss a film or two and how it captures our fears and anxieties around technology and the place it holds in our lives. This week, I'm joined by author Lucy Rose, who I actually interviewed about her gory and delicious book, The Lamb, a few months ago. I'll link to that conversation in the show notes. And here, we talk about two films that turned the screen into a stage. The Skype teen horror Unfriended from 2014 and the John Cho starring thriller Searching, which was released in 2018. Both of these movies lock us inside the digital interface. Facebook chats, FaceTime messages, Google inboxes, Skype calls, and both of them ask us to decode a mystery. But they're not just whodunits, but rather reflections of our digital lives, how we perform and lie online, and the dangerous consequences of our digital shenanigans. Remember to subscribe and review the podcast if you enjoy this episode, and you can also stalk my activity online by following The Final Girls UK on Instagram and Letterboxd, where you can see the films I'll be discussing this season. Drop me a line at hello@thefinalgirls.co.uk to tell me about any ghost encounters on the internet, and if you wish to support the podcast further and enjoy bonus episodes, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefinalgirls. But with all that said, please enjoy our conversation about Unfriended and Searching. By 2014, the internet reached a new milestone. The average person was spending more than 5 hours a day online, Facebook was used by half of the world's online users, and Skype calls totaled over 2 billion minutes every single day. We were living inside screens, and we trusted those screens with our secrets. Big mistake. I've always been quite happy with the remote recording studio that I use, but I'm particularly happy when we're talking about Unfriended and Searching because we can't see each other. So if we can't see each other, there cannot be a ghost in the background.
I know. It feels so meta, doesn't it?
I know. It's like it's deliberately lo-fi so that no ghosts can enter this recording booth.
This is our digital circle of salt to stop the spirits.
I love that. Lucy, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, this time as a guest.
I know. Thank you so much for having me. When you asked me which movies I wanted to talk about, I immediately was like, I have to talk about these ones. I love screenlife films. I'm obsessed with them.
Me too. Okay, we're gonna have a good time, and I'll pick you up on why you're obsessed with screenline films.
Yeah.
But before we begin, I've been asking all the guests in the series the same kind of icebreaker question, and
Cool.
because I'm nosy, what was the first piece of technology that you owned or that you felt that you owned?
Oh God. I'm also really intrigued to know what your answer is to this too. And I'm wondering if generationally, if we all owned the same thing. It was like a red USB MP3 player. that you could have like wired headphones, and it was tiny, and it had like a tiny little screen, and you couldn't pick what songs. It was all shuffle, and I was obsessed with it. And I can't admit to any crimes here, but like, you know, bmp3.com was like a very frequently visited website of mine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I remember it wasn't the first piece of tech that I remember kind of having, but I definitely remember, and also because I've recently rediscovered it in some box as I was clearing out my flat. It was a yellow mini CD player.
Oh, nice.
Because this is going to tell you, this is why I'm not a tech entrepreneur. And instead, I'm a critic and a writer, because when the iPod came out and the mini disc came out, I fully mounted a campaign for my parents to get me the mini disc, because I'm like, nobody's going to get the iPod. That's stupid.
That's lame. I think, do you know what? Actually, I have to renege my answer. I definitely had a portable CD player before I had an MP3 player. I loved that thing. I had one CD. I had Now 42, which basically was just like the Venga Boys and Aqua.
Yeah. Iconic. I had that one too.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. And Witch Doctor. Like.
Yep.
Yep.
It was that I had a portable CD player as well. And the choice of what CDs to bring with you when you went on holiday.
I know. Sacred decisions.
Honestly, you could spend a whole day.
Mm-hmm.
It's like me now with picking what books I'm going to bring with me on a trip. It's like I need a full 6 hours of deliberation.
You do. You really do.
And since we're talking about this whole series about the intersections of horror and technology, what is the most interesting thing for you about kind of that Venn diagram?
Oh, God, that's a good question. I think for me, like, it's really strange that, like, we have these whole separate lives where we exist online. And I really feel that as somebody who has a social media presence and, like, has to have a social media presence for work, because there's, like, the online version of me, which is definitely, like, a real facet of who I am. Mm-hmm. But, like, that's not all of who I am. And so it sort of feels like a very strange other version of me that exists, and the fact that like the imprint is there kind of forever is quite terrifying as well. So I think that there's like this is like sort of existential dread that comes with existing online, and just like real life, there are parts of the internet that are really lovely and wholesome, and then there's the dark web. And all the dark things that are happening that you don't necessarily see all the time. And I think it's a really interesting mirror image of what real life is actually like, but kind of to the extreme.
There's something really creepy as well about how those versions of yourself remain in amber on the internet.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, you have a really big social media presence, and I wonder if you ever are... This is probably too existential too quickly. Do you ever get scared about like the fact that you evolve as a human that grows and changes, but then the online version of yourself kind of has to remain static? Otherwise people are disappointed because that is not the product that they're buying into.
Yeah, it's really scary because I think people come to know you for like a certain thing, and like we're all always changing. And I do think you definitely feel a pressure to kind of like stick within the thing that you want to do or the niche that you've become known for. But like humans are like so much more complicated than like, you know, one like algorithmic interest that it's trying to place you in. I just feel like our relationship to the internet is basically like the film Us. Like there's just this other version. I'm kind of scared she's gonna like break out and like come and get me at some point.
Or replace you.
Or replace me.
Oh my God. Well, that's a whole nother movie. But going back to what you were saying about screenlife films, why do you love them?
I find them like really thrilling, and our relationship to technology as people are so codependent with it. And so I mean, my phone tells me what my screen time is. Like it'll tell me what my screen time is for my phone and for specific apps. And it is terrifying that I actually think I look more at my app interface than I do at like the faces of my actual real human friends. Like that terrifies me. So I think the fact that I know the interface of TikTok more intimately probably than I, maybe know the face of one of my closest friends who I don't see as often and don't have as much screen, quote unquote screen time with. I think that is petrifying.
I think I've been fascinated with them. I'm going to try and date it with like Paranormal Activity.
Oh, yes.
Because I remember I watched the Blair Witch Project before, but the Blair Witch Project has like a whole kind of found footage conceit, right? And it's old videotapes, which is still a physical thing that you can find and cut together.
Analogy.
Yeah. But with Paranormal Activity, it was like the digital surveillance footage.
Yeah.
And the way that it was cut, it was so unforgiving. It was just like, here's some text and here you go, just a footage. And a lot of it is kind of dull, but it forces you to look in the corners.
It does. Yeah, totally. I'm actually a massive lover of Paranormal Activity. It is like,
Same.
it is such an amazing film. And I think the part of the horror of like something like this genre, and particularly in that film, is the banality of it is like actually quite scary. And you're right, it does force you to look in the dark corners and to watch for things and be hypervigilant. Yeah.
And also like there's a part of me, okay, let me paint a picture. You know how this is probably aging me, but like if you were invited to a friend's house and it's their computer, you're not really bringing your laptop with yourself anymore. This is probably more around the time where most families had like a desktop, a single computer, as opposed to everybody having a laptop and an iPad. And you would kind of look over their shoulder. I still have this feeling of like, I find it really intriguing to see how people set up their desktops, how they set up their computers, their digital life, like what's their setup? It's like looking on someone's desk. I find it equally as fascinating to look at how someone had their desk set up.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's something really nosy that I find really satisfying about screenlife films, because even in Unfriended, which we're going to talk about, and in Searching a lot too, you can see like where their pictures are at, what do they call their chats, how they type, where the images at, what's their background photo, like what is their folder structure for their memories. Like all of those things I think are such key
intimate details.
Yeah, they're character details as well if you're watching a movie. So I find that, and there's also, I don't know if you get this, especially thinking of films like Host, that all take care, and even Unfriended, you want to interfere because it's the illusion of life, but you can't. And that makes me tense the entire time because I'm so familiar with the interface that I'm like, just close it.
I know. It's sort of the digital equivalent of don't go into that basement. Like, don't. Yeah. It's so great. And do you know, just jumping off what you just said, there is something so real as well about like the sort of historical and cultural documentation of like folklore and the internet. And I think of like that jump scare video with the car that went on Facebook. And I don't know if you remember this. There was this website where like you played a maze or a game or something, and then like the girl from The Exorcist, Reagan's face came up and screamed at you, and like there's just all those little, and like back rooms and creepypasta, and there's just this entire canon of really strange, like scary internet foes that I love, that I think all builds into this like why the screen life genre is so fascinating. And even though you don't see those things within the films that we're going to talk about, I think that kind of knowing that they're there is, and part of that canon and that cultural, that stupid car jump scare video got me every time. I think about it daily.
So you mentioned the word genre. So do you think that screen life films are a genre or more of an aesthetic?
Oh God. I think can it be like a sub genre? Like, like is
we
there
love
like
fun and horror.
Yeah, like just like the sort of like really like granular of it. I think it is, because they kind of do have their own conventions that you kind of see pop up quite a lot. And I think if you can genuinely categorize something and, if there is like enough of a catalogue of these stories to kind of develop those conventions and those recognizable tropes, I think you can call it a genre. But it's still early days. It's still like, I still think it's kind of like a baby genre. It's growing.
That's interesting, because it feels like it's been going on for like at least 20 years. Because there's a really early, well, the first sort of screenlife horror film, which we've covered on the show and in this series, called The Collingswood Story, which is 2002. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And there's been a number of those since, kind of more in later in the last like 10 years or something.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's been consistently used, and each one has a new gimmick, and the new gimmick is always the new form of communication. So it was Skype and Unfriended, but it's Zoom and Host.
Oh,
and
God.
It's dashcam footage in dashcam, and it's sort of live streaming in Spree and in live stream and in Deadstream. So it's just like I'm really interested. I think it's a subgenre of found footage myself. If I was to create a tree.
I totally agree. It is the tree. It's the tree. It's the tree of genre.
It's the tree house of horror.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Why do you think it's particularly well suited for horror?
I think it comes back to that duality again, because I think if you really, really boil it down, like so much of horror is about like the other side of humanity, or like the other side of like what we're capable of. And when you look at for example, we'll obviously get more into this, but like Laura Barnes, like I don't know, like I think this I guess comes down to a matter of opinion, but I think she's quite a complex antagonistic force, because she really forces you to reckon with this idea of victimhood and what victimhood really looks like, which is something I could talk about all day. And then in the same with Searching, you've kind of got to acknowledge that there are people who don't have the best intentions, even if they look like your friends. So I think that looking at that duality of humanity is endlessly frightening and fascinating. And it kind of unlocks this sort of, I don't know, this like instant, like sort of animalistic anthropological fear in me, because I think it's that thing of you should be able to look at under the human face and trust it, but that's not always the case. And I think I go back into my caveman brain, where I'm like, are you friend or are you foe? Like, should I be running? Should I be like coming over to you? But I think it unlocks like a really kind of like animal fear in us, even though it's very digital and contemporary. So I think that's why I think it's so well suited to horror, because it just extrapolates those really, really base animal instincts, which is what every good horror should do. It should unlock that sort of part of your brain that itches or whispers to you.
Yeah, or that warns you as well of like you're in danger.
Yeah.
Behave cautiously or approach cautiously. Except that instead of a big giant bear or a shark or whatever, you probably have you don't know how many people or who you're dealing with.
So true. True. And do you know something? You've just said that. Have you seen that trend? This is so meta. Have you seen that TikTok trend at the minute that's like, I can't tell if I'm being held at gunpoint or if my manager is sending me a message on Teams? Yeah. It's like, it's literally, that is the screen life genre, like summed up into like a sentence.
I would be front row if somebody made a workplace horror set on Teams.
Please.
Like,
Same.
That messaging interface, whatever it is a demon spawn.
It is.
Everything about it is demonic.
It's evil. And the sound that you get when someone sends you a team message, it sends something through me. Like I have such like
immediate rage. Like immediate.
It's the, do you have time for a chat?
No.
Like pick like, oh no.
No. The answer is always no.
Am I getting fired? Like
it is honestly the worst thing ever. I cannot believe somebody's not made a horror film set
I
on
know.
Teams yet. Anybody listening, get on it.
Do it now.
Because I will involuntarily hive like every time I see it on screen, on a big screen. Jesus. But before we get into the films themselves, I wanted to spend a little time talking about Timur Bergambetov, who's the Kazakh Russian film director / producer who's been behind and consistently championing screenlife films. I think he claims that he invented them, but he's definitely been supportive and active in that space since the very start. And he's also involved in both Unfriended and Searching, and he's directed or produced screenlife films of his own. I know him because he directed a major Russian horror film called Night Watch years ago, which was a big deal in Russia because they don't really do horror that much. But I wonder kind of, what do you think about this filmmaker's interest or obsession or dedication to screen life as a filmmaking language?
I love it. I'm here for it. I love it when somebody has a thing that they're really excited about and really passionate about, and it basically just develops that. And like, whether he invented it or not, like, he's made some really significant contributions to it. And I have to say, I noticed, actually didn't know that he was involved with both of them. And then I was rewatching them both for this podcast, and I saw there was a reference to Unfriended in Searching. There was something about Laura Barnes on one of the windows, and I was like, ah! And that's how I realized that he was involved in them both. As I immediately Googled, why is Laura Barnes in Searching? Like, I think she was like a trending subject or something. It was really weird. I was like, oh. But yeah, I think, you know, if you love something, and I think in the research for this podcast, there was something written about how he sees it as kind of like a cultural language. And I think that is, it's so interesting, because at the minute we live in a time of like very extreme division. And so to have this one universal language that everybody can understand, I think is like a really interesting way to join us together and to talk about, you know, like very universal subjects like fear, and like kind of our, not just like base fear in terms of like somebody shoving a hot pair of tongs down your throat, but like also our more banal fears of like the internet and like the imprint we're leaving behind, like in a very physical sense now. I think is fascinating.
I find it really interesting that like all of his, let's say, more traditional films like Night Watch and Day Watch, Wanted with Angelina Jolie. I think he directed the remake of Ben-Hur as well. Like, all of those films are massive, very commercial, action-packed, big budget action films, right?
Yeah.
And the direct opposite, and the thing that seems to excite him the most, are these screenlife films, which are, you know, mostly associated with low budget indie filmmaking. I find the fact that he is creatively driven by this new language and playing around with stories told solely through desktops and screens versus producing and directing these massive, more traditional commercial films so interesting, because it's like, I think we have a very simplistic view of what genre filmmaking can be, and you know, if someone is a commercial director, we put them in the commercial box, and if someone is an indie filmmaker, then we put them in the indie box, and we don't let those two really move between each other. And I find it really fascinating because he does move between them, and he does a lot of other like weird stuff, like try to set up tech companies and stuff. So he's clearly really intrigued by the tech space. But I love this thing that he said in an interview where he said that the world is different and the new reality needs a new language. It's the same stories, but a different way of telling them. And I'm like, it's really simple. And my first encounter with one of his films on the big screen was actually a screenlife film called Profile, which I saw at a festival and then was around festivals for like a year and a bit, and then eventually got released in the UK at some point years after it was sort of new. But it was really strange and really tense to see a big Skype screen on an enormous cinema screen. I really didn't think it would work, but it did.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think that's why these films can be quite affecting, is because they're so, it's, you know, that meme that went around where everybody was like, let's watch this the way that, you know, Christopher Nolan intended, and they were watching it on a toaster or a freaking iPod. I think that that's actually the beauty about these films, is the way that you watch them isn't dependent on like a massive like stereo sound system or the best TV. Like, you could watch this on your phone and still feel just as frightened as if you were watching it in a cinema. And so I think that ability to kind of like chameleon between devices is not only very meta because of the context of what it is, but also is like very clever from like a strategic audience perspective as well. I also think, even though in a way it dates it, it also makes it quite timeless, because as technology evolves, you can still experience it in like a very kind of like analog way, because of like how devices and technology evolve.
Well, they're going to become eventually like relics, like in a way that Unfriended is kind of already a relic, because nobody uses Skype anymore. Nobody uses those fonts. Like, our desktops don't look that way. It's completely different. It's a time capsule, like you said earlier. Definitely.
I did get, like, when I was watching it again for this, I got so, like, I don't judge anybody, okay? But, like, and I'm really sorry if you or anybody listening has their menu bar on the side of the screen. I was
no.
Put it on the bottom. Like,
no, hate it.
Yeah. I immediately was like, that's uncanny, and it's made me feel deeply uneasy. Like,
don't love it. Although, you know, this is a side digression, but I saw somewhere on one of the social medias somebody who had made their entire Mac desktop like this Renaissance Botticelli style paintings. Like, all of the icons were little Renaissance paintings, except the Finder.
No.
The Finder just stayed the same.
Just that like little smiley face. Oh, and that smiley face, it just always looks so depressed. Like, what? It's smiling, but it's not smiling on the inside. It's just really sad to be there.
Yeah, no, it's just like it's pushing through.
Yeah. It is. It's like, here's your files. I'm so happy to give them to you.
It's keeping calm and carrying on.
It is.
That's what it's doing. Really is. So let's get into the films properly. And we're going to be chatting about Unfriended and Searching. So cool. What do you, in general terms, think about both of these films? What's your relationship with them, and how has it changed since you first watched them?
I love them both. I also watched them both when they first came out. I don't know, like, I think people maybe generally have like kind of a tendency to underestimate films like this at a first glance. And I definitely think, like all films, what you put in is what you get out, because actually you can pull so much from one like cinematic text. You could ream it off into a million conversations. I think because of my age when I first saw Unfriended, and also I think because technology at the time, it, like you say, it's a reflection of technology as it was at the time, and compared to now, when we have such scary concerns around like AI, deep fakes, data purging, and, you know, whatever, I didn't really question like my relationship to the internet very much. When I first watched it, I was like, this is a cool, scary film. I think now, knowing how, I actually think it's more sinister to watch it back in reflection because of how technology has advanced. And like, I don't know, like I look back and I'm just like, oh, guys, like, you sweet summer children, you're not worried about downloading like a free game to realize it's harvested all of your personal data. So I think actually both of these films are actually more sinister to watch in hindsight. Even Searching, I think, is a really interesting one, because it kind of came out at a time where, like, politically and culturally lots was happening around children and cyberbullying, because it's so new and there's no kind of like legal things in place to protect people, really. Like, there was such a sense of anonymity on the internet, which is changing in like, you know, we've just had that new safety law come into place about scanning your face and stuff. So there's like, it's really interesting how it's evolving. But I think, I mean, I don't want to take this to a really dark, scary place, but
this is a place to take it to a dark, scary place.
It is, that's true. I dread to think the number of my peers who were being groomed online by like an older person who was hiding behind a picture of an emo boy on like, and I know that it happened to me because, and I remember the exact moment I realized that I wasn't talking to another teenager and I was talking to a grown up because of something they said. And I was like, oh, you aren't who you said you were. And it was something really gross that he said that I won't repeat because it was really, really gross. But I was like, you have that moment of realization that you've been really naive and like, that's sinister. And so I think to watch this actually in context of a time where like our relationship to technology was so naive makes these films more scary, in my opinion. And I think that they might become more scary as time goes on because of how the internet and anonymity can be weaponized online.
And it's interesting because at the time that these films came out, it was still relatively early days for the amount of destruction that people could wreak online.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like even... It was sort of a trusting time, but also not. But that, because it wasn't the early Wild Wild West days of the internet when these films are set. And Unfriended is quite interesting because it is very much about bullying, but it really is about bullying between a group of friends who know each other in real life. So the technology, the Skype conversation, the internet really becomes like a space for the paranormal revenge as opposed to for the bullying. It's just spread more widely. Yeah. But, you know, people would share those pictures. They would message each other that stuff. They would whisper behind someone's back, and that would have a similar effect on people. But now you have supporting footage that can be shared just as easily.
And there is so much to unpack with that, actually, because I don't know whether I should save this for when we really get into the meat of Unfriended, but I did some like additional research about studies into like empathy in the internet, and I think that there's like, I don't know, like it's made, again, that tiny bit of research has almost recontextualized these films for me in a really strange way. So I'll wait, and when it naturally comes up,
I can't wait. But let's get into Unfriended properly then. Yeah. Because like I was saying, it's basically a teen horror movie in so many ways. What do you make of the dynamics between a teenager? What do you make about the dynamics between the teenagers? And does it feel at all different from a standard teen slasher?
Oh, God. I mean, I'm like a 30-year-old woman who crosses the street when I see teenagers. They're so scary.
Teenagers are scary.
They're so scary. They freak me out. They just, and I have to say specifically, like, like men and women when they're teenagers are scary in very different ways. Like, I think something that frightens me about a teenage girl that is also simultaneously quite, I kind of wish is, maybe I'm scared of it because I don't have it anymore, but just the sort of confidence and the fearlessness and when I was a teenager, I was so much more confident than I am now. And I think like the start of the teenage years is like when you start to have that kind of like really like almost that spirit beaten out of you, which is why I think it gets dark when you go into your late teens and you get situations like this, because that confidence is starting to be stripped away and eroded, and all of those things. The fierceness of the teenage girl, the power of teenage girls, I think people sorely underestimate. And I think, you know, when you have teenage girls who are basically in charge of consumerism and like all the things that we're buying and experiencing, I think about Twilight and like the amazing phenomena that was because of teenage girls and like how much it impacted the cultural zeitgeist. That's the power of a teenage girl. Like global cultural change can happen if you're a teenage girl, and that is amazing, and I love that. But it can also be really dark. And I think in this film, like the way that the women treat each other is such a fascinating time capsule of misogyny at the time, and like internalized misogyny at the time. And like the way that they were just like constantly like trying to crucify each other by like showing pictures of each other being like drunk and slutty, I thought was so, like, I don't know, like it took me back, man, to like a time where like sexual empowerment was like really, really not a thing. And I found that, yeah, really, really interesting. The dynamics between the teenagers basically very cruel.
Well, it was interesting because this is what, 2015? Like this is just before we started talking about feminism online.
Yeah.
And I think it's really noticeable that it is the tail end of the particular brand of cruelty, and particularly cruelty against women and young women and any female excesses online. Like, I think there is a direct line between, and I don't think this is too much of a stretch, I think there's the direct line between the paparazzi culture that obscenely followed and photographed and made us used to photographs of your Paris Hiltons, your Britneys, your Lindsay Lohans, and really reveled in calling them bimbos and sluts and whores and drunkards. Like the images of women in their worst intimate moments.
Yeah.
And the kind of the feedback loop that exists between women who were hounded by press and media and photographed endlessly. And then the expectation of them to be those messy train wrecks.
Yeah.
Be those messy train wrecks as well in public as opposed to in private, because there's a lot of people who have a lot of different issues and might not be looking their best at different moments, but very few of them become photographed incessantly. And I think the images, particularly kind of the footage of both Laura Barnes, who is the vengeful ghost in Unfriended, but really all the other ones as well, and the way that the film uses footage, so photographs or images, photographs or videos that are then used as like blackmail material or humiliation material, is so of the time. And I think
of the time.
I think Unfriended really captures the tail end of that time as well. Because if this was set in like 2008 or something, it would have been peak. But this is the end of it, and the distribution method is slightly different. And even though they're not, you know, sharing these photographs on a world stage, and nobody's interested in the fictional world of Unfriended, of course. Nobody's interested in them in the same way as they're interested in like Lindsay Lohan going off the rails. They share it on Facebook, where their particular circle of contacts will all engage and immediately change the tune about someone's entire being and personality based on one picture or one video. So and even the footage of Laura like passed out and drunk and soiling herself is like, I immediately, maybe it's just because I was reading a book about where she was discussed, but I immediately thought of like images of Amy Winehouse, like bleeding and semi-passed out and drugged out of her mind. And I'm like, we immediately categorize, particularly when it's women, we immediately put them in a different box, and it's impossible for them to reach out of that box, or it takes them a very, very long time.
It's so exploitative, isn't it? And I think, you know, it's what's so interesting about what you've just said as well is that it reminds me, like, this came out at a really similar time to, like, can you remember when Vanessa Hudgens had her nudes leaked?
Yes.
Culturally, everybody hated her, and she was genuinely the victim of like a gendered hate crime, and we all just hated her for that. And like what you've just said is like such kind of sums that up in context of this film, which is about like how do we exploit like basically really vulnerable people, specifically in this case like a woman who is like clearly mentally not very well. How do we capture her at her lowest point and make that her defining moment in her humanity? Like, it's so dark. But
even like without mental health being a factor in here, it's just a drunk teenager.
I know, that shouldn't define your life.
Like passed out in a really vulnerable place, and she is somehow the villain and the laughingstock in this, and not the people pointing their fingers at her.
And that, honestly, that's kind of something I was really keen to talk about, is like Laura Barnes, she's the antagonist of this story, and she is, you know, she's meant to be the thing that frightens us. But actually, I just thinking about her, like, kind of relationship to victimhood is fascinating, because I think she's seen as this antagonist, and when somebody's seen as an antagonist, their victimhood is almost stripped away, when actually the two can exist together, even though, like, as human beings, I think we really struggle to accept that somebody who is a victim can also simultaneously be flawed, particularly if she's a woman. And that's why Laura Barnes is so interesting to me. What's extra interesting about this film in context of that is so this is where my fancy research comes in. I was so interested in terms of, like, cyberbullying and, like, our relationship to empathy. Is the internet making us worse? So I went on my little deep dive, and I found out that the answer is no. It's not making us worse statistically. There's a great study, and it's on my phone, so I can't actually cite it to anybody right now, but it is a real study, that people who are empathetic and kind will be empathetic and kind online, and their behavior won't change based off of whether they have anonymity or not. People who are hostile and confrontational remain hostile and confrontational online, and their behavior doesn't change because their anonymity. And I find that terrifying, because with something like Unfriended, is Laura Barnes the real antagonist? Because yes, she's doing mean things, but the behavior of those teenagers hasn't changed because they're online. The acts they committed by exploiting her, those were just human acts, regardless of whether or not the internet was there. They still exploited her situation. They were still talking about her suicide, or, like, the fact that she'd passed out. And I just find that really interesting, because I think we're always looking for something to blame, a situation, something like the internet. Is the internet making us worse? It's got to be the internet doing X, Y, Z. But actually, I think human behavior, like, that is the scary thing, is the development of human behavior, and, like, how really, when you boil it down to it, we are kind of just animals who misbehave and do terrible things. And that's why I find Unfriended so frightening, because actually, if you take out the ghost element, it's still quite scary. It's still a very terrifying thing to have happened.
I think Laura Barnes is a really interesting figure, because in many ways she is very classic, like a ghost that was somehow wronged in life and now returns from the dead to take revenge on the people who wronged her. Very traditional, very gothic. But I think you're right, because the group of teenagers that pushed her to suicide, they did that offline. And they are continuing that behavior between themselves as well. They're absolute demons to each other. Like, they are really, really awful. They're like the mean kids that are just being mean to each other because they don't, that is who they are. They're just kind of dicks. And what I think is actually, like, the thing they're scared of online is not the fact that there's possibly, like, a ghost or a demon or whatever in the interwebs. It's the fact that that ghost or demon or whatever knows their secrets and can expose them. Secrets are the actual currency of fear in Unfriended, because everything that Laura does is just reveal the things that they have done and that they've been hiding. And because it is set in the 2010s, and there is evidence of it, because apparently we all like to just take pictures that incriminate us nowadays, which is great for the ghost, not so great for everyone else.
Note to self, don't capture incriminating evidence of yourself and give it to a ghost.
Note to self, incognito mode does not work. But there is something interesting. I read this piece in prep for this, where there was this great line that said, Laura Barnes is everything that's scary about the internet. And I think it's because it's this permanence of being online. Like, anything that you say or put on the internet, even if you think it's secret, it's still out there somewhere. There's a footprint. And if there's a footprint, a creature like the ghost of Laura Barnes can discover it and use it against you.
Mm-hmm. And do you know what's really interesting about that? The idea of just as kind of because that is terrifying, but as an extension of that in terms of like form and character and horror conventions, like even a ghost is the idea that life actually does carry some permanence because it carries on after death. And I find like this idea of like speaking with the dead in a very digital way, like a digital Ouija board, so interesting because I think it's just that fear that something is following us, and whether it's you know, like always in a horror movie, it's, you know, it's something to represent that. But actually, I think a lot of us imprint our own secrets and our own worries and anxieties onto someone or something like Laura Barnes, who just, I feel like she's the epicenter of like everybody's wrongdoings.
You know, I'm really fascinated by this idea of ghosts and the internet, and how it's been used in a lot of these films that I've been watching. Do you think it works in Unfriended? Do you think it does something different with it that other films don't do?
Oh God, I think that's like, I guess the context of when it came out is maybe really important. I think one thing that I never expect from films, like to be honest, any film, is I don't really ever, my measure of if a film is good is not if it's reinvented the wheel, because actually I can watch something that has been done before and it can become my favorite film of all time. Yeah. I think the measure of the value of this film is the ability to look into kind of what we've already talked about, which is this idea that there is a duality to us. There is the version of us that carries the secrets and does the terrible things even though we know they're bad, and the version of us that we present, which I think is manifested really well through this idea that even the main character in the story is posting things on Facebook about missing her best friend and blah, blah, blah. Because she does have that Facebook post, which is just like, I miss you, RIP. And then like actually the way she behaved to her in real life was awful. I like, in terms of like digital ghosts, I was that kid who grew up and did Ouija boards in my bedroom after school every day. I was really into ghosts. And so the idea that you could have a digital ghost to me is so exciting. Like a ghost in the internet I just think is everything. And I think it's becoming more common to see kind of like ghost in the machine trope, just because of how technology is evolving and like how that is reflected culturally in like the storytelling that we see. The reason I like Laura Barnes as a ghost is probably because I think as a character, I think when bad things happen to us, I think everybody fantasizes about like what they would have said differently, or like, you know, kind of how they would have exacted revenge, even if it's sort of petty and silly. Laura Barnes is the version of us that actually does it. And that is like, that's why she's quite terrifying to me, and why she feels so different to like other ghosts in the machine that I've seen, say compared to like Paranormal Activity, where like the entity is clearly aware of the camera and has a relationship to the camera. Laura Barnes is like, she just terrifies me. She's so human. And that's like that. It's the human element that scares me, because technology, in like the same way in real life, technology is just the tool that's used. It's the human behind it that's terrifying. And that's kind of the same, like kind of across, these films and real life. Like often, you know, when you think about digital warfare, the technology is completely ambivalent to us. Actually, it's the human behind the technology that makes it frightening, because it's how it's wielded. I do think, I've got to say, I think Laura Barnes is kind of an icon. Like, I genuinely don't believe she gets the kind of like love in the horror community that she deserves. She definitely deserves to be more iconic. Maybe this is the start of my campaign to like make her a more prominent part of our horror culture. I don't know.
Well, I think it's really hard for a character to become an icon when you barely see them on screen.
I know.
Like
that's so true.
The one time, well, the 3 times we see her on screen, one, she's about to shoot herself. The other time, she's passed out blind drunk and soiled herself. And the third time is the little jump scare at the end, which is just like one smash cut.
I love that.
Which I think is just such a cute throwback to the first YouTube jump scare videos.
Yeah, it really is.
But I wanted to add, because I think what's scary about her is, I find what's scary about her slightly different from what you were just describing. Because I find Unfriended and Laura Barnes to be more indebted to something like Carrie.
Oh my God, yeah.
Than like even ghost films in a way.
Yeah.
Because the thing that's actually scary is not the fact that she's like a human who's been wronged and is vengeful. Is the fact that she's that, but now she's got godlike powers.
Oh my God, I love that. Okay, I totally agree.
Because like the one thing you don't want to give a teenager who is just like yo-yoing between extreme emotions and a teenager who's been like objectively wronged by people they trusted. And I think there's a lot of similarities between, oh my God, I'm gonna forget their names now. What is the name of the girl who's the best friend of Laura Barnes?
God, the main character.
Yeah, Blair. So I think there's a direct parallel between Blair and Unfriended, who's Laura Barnes' best friend, who feels like she didn't do anything wrong and slowly accepts that maybe she did, and then she dies, so she's killed. And Sue Snell in Carrie, like the Amy Irving character in the original 70s film, where she is the one who tries to do something nice for Carrie and then it backfires. Where it's like, you're still a mean girl, even though you're trying to reform. A big part of that is them accepting the fact that they're not the angelic figures that they think themselves to be, that they also have a mean streak and like a cruelty to them.
Yeah, I think that is so true. That is so true. And I think because like normally, like, well, not normally, that's kind of too general, I think, but like horror movies are so associated with that final girl trope, which is all about purity and like, you know, goodness and what's the word? Like being virginal and all of that. And she's kind of the opposite of that. She sort of carries that veneer about her. But she's, you know, Blair's mean. Blair's a very mean girl. It's kind of like a digital Lord of the Flies, you know? That's kind of the vibe I'm getting.
And I wanted to very, very briefly touch on, have you seen the sequel?
To Unfriended?
Yeah.
No, there's a sequel?
Okay. There's a sequel called Unfriended Dark Web.
Oh my God. Okay, I know exactly.
We don't need to get into it.
But I will be watching that straight after this.
But moving on to Searching.
Yes.
Which is also a straightforward screenlife film, but I think is much more of a thriller rather than a horror film. And I wonder kind of, what do you think makes it interesting or different, or what does it add to the screenlife film? Even though it came out just 3 years after Unfriended, it feels more polished, I would say. Yeah,
I think so. Maybe that's a reflection of who the main character is, because in Unfriended, the characters are these messy teenagers who don't really have a fully formed sense of self yet. And they're all really cocky. One of my favorite characters in Unfriended is the character that Jacob Wysocki plays, because I'm kind of obsessed with him. But he's a very messy teenager who's like, you know, cocky, really into tech, thinks he can beat it. Whereas like in Searching, you have like quite a demure figure who's like the father of this young girl who's gone missing. And oh my God, John Cho is like one of the best actors. Like, I love
John Cho.
Oh, isn't he the best? Like, he carries that, like, I think something that he does really well, and like the things that I love about his performances across his body of work is when he carries sadness, because he does it so convincingly, and like my heart just beats for him whenever he's on screen, and I can see that grief like run across his face, and that desperation. And I just think it's even though it's the same format, it's actually a very, very different kind of film. I think it's like much more gentle, and I think it explores more gentle human experiences. I think they're both fantastic. This comparison is like not to discuss like whether one is better than the other. I think they're both brilliant contributions to screen life. But I do enjoy Searching, because my experience of screen life films was basically solely horror films. So this was really interesting for me to experience something that was not so much a horror and was more, I don't know, like demure. Demure. And it really made me feel sad. I felt so desperate for him as a character. John.
Listen, the fact that we have failed as a culture to make John Cho the biggest movie star in the world, I will never forgive us for it. This man, I have ridden hard for John Cho since he had a bit part in the American Pie movies.
Yeah.
Like the range between Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle and that entire franchise.
Yeah.
And Searching and Columbus.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Like,
he is incredible.
He can do literally everything. And I wonder as well, as I kept thinking, I was so emotional watching Searching. I had watched it before several times. I was on a train watching it, and I watched both of these films back to back on a train on my laptop, and I was getting really, like, it was like the prelude to Up, you know, where you see the two characters fall in love, and then one of them dies, and it's the same story, you know, it's this widowed husband with a baby girl, and his wife dies.
I know.
And I'm just like, in 5 minutes, I'm like weeping. And all I'm doing is going through your perfectly labeled, archived pictures of your family from like Windows 98 to Windows XP.
True. It's so interesting, though, that you also watched... So when I watched these in preparation for this, I also watched Unfriended first and then Searching. I'm so intrigued that you also watched them in the same order. And I psychologically, I'm like, why did we both do that?
I think it's probably chronological.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God, of course, yeah. I honestly, part of me was like, I think I'm going to feel big feelings about Searching. So I sort of got... that one out of the way, Unfriended out of the way first, because I knew I'd be scared, but like I'm more scared of feeling sad than I am of feeling fear. So like I was like,
that's fair.
When he lifts, you know, right at the end, when he, not to go straight to the end of the movie, when they find his daughter in that, like, I literally was like almost sobbing. I just really felt for him, and it's so his performance that sells it. I hope he comes back and Laura Barnes us for like not making him the biggest movie star of all time.
Do you know what I think was the moment for me? And this is what I wanted to talk about. So like on the one hand, I mean, it's cheap, sentimental shit, right? Like we know it. We understand what the narrative is doing, but it doesn't mean that it's not working. I think on the one hand, it's John Cho's performance, like his face is so, it's just such a, he's so good at making you feel exactly what his character is feeling. It is just this enormous power that he has in his face, in the way that he moves, in the way that he speaks. Like, he's not an actor who does like a lot of different accents or anything like that. It's all about, I think, the delivery and the intonation with him.
And the interiority as well, I think, too.
But also there's this thing which is unique to screen life, I believe, where in Searching, you can tell how he's feeling by the way that he navigates his desktop.
True. Yes.
So the moment that absolutely destroyed me is when he's like uploading videos of his daughter who he believes to be dead at this point, and he's going through this bank of videos, and he finds one where she gives him a little card saying best dad ever, and he deletes the video. He watches 3 seconds, he moves it to trash, and he deletes it. And I'm like,
that killed me. That I knew you were about to say that moment. As soon as you started, I was like, oh no, don't bring it up. You're so right.
And we don't see him. We just know how he's feeling because of how his like cursor moves on the screen.
It's so sad. And like, there is something, you mentioned this earlier, about kind of that, the intimacy, the way someone types. And we do see this in Unfriended as well. But I think that because of the kind of story that it is in Searching. They give off very different kind of emotional pathos. In Unfriended, it's like very anxious, whereas in Searching, you feel like a sadness. And it's a massive extension of what you've just said, which is when he types out messages and deletes them. I find that so interesting to see what somebody says unfiltered versus thinking about it, deleting it and writing it back. And in Unfriended, it's often lying. People will tell the truth, delete it, and then write a lie. Whereas in Searching, it's the exact same thing. He writes when he sees that his daughter hasn't taken out the bin. He's like, why haven't you taken out the fucking bin? Like, but not like that. But he's so angry, and then he deletes it, and you see the worry across his face. He starts to like notice things in like the frame and stuff. And there's something just endlessly fascinating about that. Like who a person is, what they would say unfiltered versus what they actually think, and how they'd want to say it when they're in kind of demure mode. Even, you know, linking to that deleting the video thing, and there's you get to see an interior. How do you say that word? You get to see an interiority. I don't know. An
interior life.
Yeah, like an interior life with this genre of film that you wouldn't ever see in any other kind of drama, because you have access to that like inner thought, which is what you were talking about at the beginning with the clicking and the way someone's desktop is laid out. Like you never get to see that very intimate detail.
Well, you see that as well with several characters here, because we see him, well, he jumps between his profile, his wife's profile, and his daughter's profile. And we see even the background image changes, the way their desktop will lay out, the fact that his wife had like a digital Rolodex, which is really sweet. But there's something about also the different online lives that we lead, I think comes into play very strongly in Unfriended. And it's something you mentioned at the very start of our chat. And in Searching, Margot lies to her dad about who she is, about who her friends are, how isolated she is after the death of her mom, and how she tries to connect with people online. What do you think, or how do you think the film is showing us about these online versus offline lives, and how we can hide ourselves from the people that we know in real life, but have this completely different existence online?
Oh God, this is so fascinating. I actually think this film is more relevant now than it's ever been, because for the first time, and I think it was all springed off by COVID, really, we're having these really intimate discussions around like both gendered gendered loneliness, so like male loneliness versus female loneliness and all of that. But we're also just talking about like the inherent loneliness that human beings feel because we're conscious. And I think that this film, what it does really well, as alongside talking about kind of the more overt themes like grief and like the pressure of being a parent in like the digital world, is like our inherent relationship to loneliness, because both of the characters are so lonely. There's a scene where she's on that like live stream website, and her dad comes in and he's like, "Are you going to come watch the TV with me?" And you can just see he's just so desperate to connect with his child. And you can see he's so lonely. And I think what the internet does is unfortunately, it becomes a tool for us to compartmentalize all of that loneliness into different places. And that is like becomes really obvious in something like Searching, where you can literally categorize the pieces of your life onto different websites, particularly for Margot, who does have like all of, she has her Instagram, she has the live website, her email, like all of these different facets of who she is and her secrets hidden away, when actually, like, if we just communicated with each other more and kind of felt brave enough to be vulnerable with each other as human beings, like there would be less of a need for this compartmentalization. But both characters are guilty of doing it, and I think it's almost like a really beautiful digital parable about like what happens when we stop talking to each other. And I think that, to me, is more relevant now than it was when it came out before COVID, and before kind of the sort of crazy crusades of like division in the digital age. I think that's why I loved it so much when I rewatched it, because I felt so especially like, oh, John, like his face, but like I really did feel like I'd been that person, even though like I've never actually lost a child, but I felt that that intense loneliness and that intense worry about, you know, not knowing where my loved ones are hiding themselves. That's such a human fear. Like, yeah.
And also, that's beautifully put. And also the fear of like missing things in plain sight. Because the way that John's character reconstructs kind of Margot's online persona and where she is, you know, what a tough time she's been having and what she's been doing kind of behind his back is through digital footprints.
Yeah.
It's these clues, these little breadcrumbs that she's been hiding, but also he starts to kind of understand where she is as a person through the things that were always obvious, but he just wasn't looking at.
Yeah.
And they were always there. And also similarly, and this, I was surprised at this movie from 2018. This is the most ACAB movie I've seen at that time. Because it deploys the same kind of like, oh, we're going to cover up all the digital breadcrumbs. We're going to use kind of expectations of who we are offline to manipulate information and reality online that can then influence real life people and real life events through Deborah Messing's character, the kind of the detective.
Sort of systematic control almost, yeah.
Yeah, like genuinely like manipulating the system so that she can protect her son, who has also been doing stuff online. And is revealed to be like the real villain of the whole thing. Not her son, but rather her.
It's such an interesting mirror image of John Cho's character. Actually, now I think about it, because they're almost like sort of yin and yang to each other. They're kind of like working around each other, all out of this need to feel protective and connected towards their children. I never thought about it that way. That's so interesting.
Yeah, I was one
so
of them is abusing her power, and the other one,
yeah,
one's just trying to find his daughter.
He's like, "Where's my kid?"
I know, but do you? And I do wonder. I don't want to talk too much about Deborah Messing because she's revealed herself to be a horrendous human being. But do you think the fact that it stars recognizable faces, like well-known actors like John Cho, do you think that adds to a screenlife film, or do you think it sort of acts as a distraction?
I think it kind of depends, because I will say, for me, I do look at John Cho and go, oh my God, it's John Cho.
Yeah.
But he was so convincing, and like, again, he's such a skilled actor. Like, he's just really one of the best. Deborah Messing,
yeah, whatever.
Yeah. But I think it kind of depends. I think it depends on how good of an actor you are, because there are actors who are so recognizable, but they are ultimately like so sophisticated when it comes to their craft that they can carry it off, like John Cho, who I just think does a marvelous job, and is like, my heart bleeds for him when he's on screen in this movie. Like, I'm so with him. But I mean, Unfriended, I have to say, I do think I felt more like it was happening to me, because I didn't, other than Jacob Wysocki, who's like a king and I love him, and when he put his hand in that blender, I was like, no, King, don't. Take your hand back out the blender. I felt more relaxed into it, I think. But I also think that that's a consequence of the different tones of the film, because I think Unfriended is like basically all in real time. And it's kind of more relaxed, and it doesn't have things like sort of really scary overt score, whereas like actually Miss Searching is like a much more commercial vehicle, and it does have moments of like actual like musical score introduced into it, and it's not in real time. It's kind of set over like I think several days. So I think that's kind of not the only factor that made me feel less kind of like I was living it, and that's not a negative comment. I think it's just like how the form has been used to kind of explore the narratives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think you can notice the the perfecting of the screen life language much more in Searching. And I think it also, because the genre is different as well. It's more of a thriller that's character-led rather than a horror that is convention-led.
Yeah.
I think also the fact that it does not commit itself to one single screen or one single source of footage, because there's cameras, like surveillance cameras that are used. There's news footage that is used. We kind of go back in time to see Margot talk with on the streaming service, which is not in real time. I think the way that it plays with time just makes it much more dynamic as a story, which we're much more used to in sort of more straightforward, particularly Hollywood narratives. And that then makes the screen life element of it kind of a lot more integrated. Like we don't really, we stop noticing it because it lets us off the hook quite a few times from just watching David's iPhone, FaceTime, and his desktop computer, right? We go and see him from different angles. We see different characters from different angles. We're in different spaces. We're outside as well. Like the found footage of the police, of the news report of the moment where he finds his daughter. Like that has no business being in a screen life kind of, if you're being really strict about the narrative rules, but because it bends them a little bit, it is so much, it feels so much bigger and so much more Hollywood. But at the same time, if you're getting really nitpicky about it, then it's more, I would say, like found footage even than screen life, because it allows itself those exits or those detours to the service of the story.
Yeah. I think that's where the line of the genre just becomes so blurred. And I think that's why I'm kind of in agreement with you, where I'm like, I think it's a sub-genre of found footage, because it's just, there's so much bleed out into kind of like, if you were going to create really strict rules around it, I think there's too much bleed for it to be considered kind of its own singular thing. But I think also that's kind of the great thing about horror, is that even though Searching is not necessarily a horror, it's such a broad genre. Like, it's mad to me that in the same genre, like compared to something like romantic comedy where you have kind of like Bridget Jones and Pride and Prejudice, in horror you have Anna and the Apocalypse, which is a Christmas zombie musical set in Glasgow, and Hereditary, which is just like, they're actually, those films are like worlds apart, and the only thing they have in common is fear. But that's, you know, that's kind of the really interesting thing about horror as a genre to me, and why it fascinates me maybe more than other genres, is because it's just, it bleeds out so much into lots of other genres. And I think that's why it's kind of difficult to categorize a lot of the time, but particularly in this case where like there is so much bleed into like, oh my God, well, what is this? You know? And
to bring these two films together, kind of both about our lives on the internet. And the internet started off as weird and cruel, and arguably has only become worse right now. Do you think that both Unfriended and Searching have something to say about the cruelness of existing online?
I think back to that study, which made me think about these films very differently, which is that I don't think it makes us better or worse. I think it just holds up a mirror to who we really are. And that's scary, because I think naively I want to think that there are really mostly lots of good people out there, and probably that's true. But I think part of being a human being is kind of accepting how messy and difficult humanity really is. And so I love these films even more in the context of kind of confronting who I really am as a person, or like confronting that mirror image, because it kind of gives them a richness that they didn't have before that context, I think.
I think it's interesting because sometimes, well, I think Searching, no, actually I think both of these films touch on this, right? That the online or the digital self can be a mask, that is much more mask for yourself than for other people.
Yeah.
Because you think just because you're not doing this in real life, quote unquote, real life, it doesn't count.
Yeah,
and
that's
you're
so
still
true.
good.
Mhm.
And even, you know, the boy who essentially pushes Margot into the ravine at the end of Searching and who sort of has a crush on her but doesn't know how to speak to her in real life, so he catfishes her. And by the way, that boy is very lightly and awkwardly coded as neurodivergent in some way, but it's never really explored. And I was like, I'm going to brush this away because this is 2018. I don't think we were there yet, but
he's referred to as a quote unquote special boy.
yeah. I was like,
I think it's the words.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, this more than the Windows desktop is what dates the film.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's an element of like, I'm doing my best, or I'm trying to connect in ways. I'm not bad, but I've accidentally done bad things because of the mask and the protection of the internet. And I think a lot of the characters think, including Blair in Unfriended, think that if they just kind of come clean, if they try to just step out, you know, from behind the computer, then it doesn't count because their intentions were good. But the digital damage is still real damage.
Yeah. And I think that that's like a kind of an extension of how we communicate goodness and badness to ourselves from like a really young age. Like if you look at fairy tales, there's a very, very strong line between good and bad. And actually, as you get older, you realize that isn't true. And I think we're taught to believe that most bad people know that they're bad and they know they're doing bad things and they're very conscious of it. But actually, I think most bad people think that they're doing the right thing in some strange sort of way, or they convince themselves that they're doing the right thing. But I also think in terms of like narrative and story, I think a bad person or like a person who's making bad, negative, flawed, selfish decisions and convincing themselves that actually they're doing it for sort of more good reasons is ultimately so much more compelling than an antagonist who's just doing bad shit because they want to do bad shit. And I think that that's honestly, like, people really underestimate both of these films. I think that's part of it. And like Blair is such a brilliant example of that. When you started talking about the comparison to Carrie, I was like, oh my God, yes. There's something so interesting about a character who appears good at a first glance and also thinks that they're a good person. But actually, the more you kind of unpick those layers and get to know the kind of granular level of who that person is, like exploring their flaws and their kind of their selfishness and their perversions or their prejudices, whatever, that's, to me, when someone becomes really interesting. Whether they're good or not is kind of it's too difficult to put into a category, because there's who we are as people, there's what we think of ourselves, there's what other people think of us, and all of those factors are going to impact us. But I do find that really interesting, the idea of goodness and badness and how we quantify it.
And Lucy, before we wrap up, is there anything about any of these films, or screen life horror as it happens, that you wanted to bring up that we may not have covered in our conversation?
Just watch more of them, make more of them, make The Workplace one, someone. I think they're great films, and I think people really underestimate them and maybe don't see them as kind of like art because of their form, because it's seen as like cheap or associated with low budget indie filmmaking. I don't know. But I think that there's like a real craft to making these convincing and interesting and three-dimensional. And these are two really good examples of screen life films that I think like constantly pop back into my brain for being like basically fucking brilliant. But I just think they're constantly underestimated because of their form. And like, I think something I really wish is that people were kind of more open-minded about them, because I just think they're great. They're really good.
And also, just one final note from me as well is that they are feats of editing.
Yeah.
because the way, like, you would think, to echo your sentiment, you would think that these are like, quote unquote, very simple to do. But my God, the amount of time and detail that goes into the editing of these films, I think is probably more intense. And maybe an editor will correct me right in. But even kind of reading about the production of both of these films, like, they were relatively simple to shoot, but took a long time to edit and pull together because of the amount of detail required.
It's a craft. It's a craft.
Lucy, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. And where can listeners find more of your work online?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. You can find me on TikTok in my own screenlife movie, Lucy Rose Creates, and I'm also on Instagram as well. And sometimes I pop onto Blue Sky, but not as much as I should. And you can find me there just hanging out digitally. This one version of me stuck in amber forever. Just one, Lucy. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved this.
It was my pleasure.